Sadly, I already know the average response to this video will be pure ignorance and to not have a single shred of empathy. But the community of Dead by Daylight has grown massive, and the most bitter will often be the loudest. A lot of these issues don't even affect me, but I still try my best to understand and have empathy. It doesn't matter what side you play on or how serious you play, accessibility in Dead by Daylight is a must. Recently, Dead by Daylight hit an amazing milestone over 60 million unique players, which is great, right? But despite how many players DBD has, and how long it's been out, nearly 8 years, there's not much in terms of accessibility improvements aside from little additions here and there. I'd like to utilize my platform for good about these issues, not just as a content creator, but also as a fog whisperer so this can get pushed out as much as possible. I always want to advocate to help gamers out there who are in need. So, a while back, I asked the community on DBD Twitter what some of their biggest gripes with accessibility were in DBD. The video gets lengthy, but let's talk about it. And again, to start, I'm very well aware that there are going to be shitters, so I actually have a few points to address for the most common counterclaims that get brought up whenever someone advocates for accessibility improvements in DBD. Number 1, it's a horror game, go play something else. Yes, that's true, but horror should be accessible for all players, even those with phobias, disabilities, sensory issues, and more. And these issues are more often than not uncontrollable or involuntary. Some can be born with them, or develop them from trauma. It just depends. Number 2, it'll make queues longer. I seriously doubt it'll make queues much longer considering how massive the player base is, how steadily it's growing, and how many solutions that could be made that wouldn't divide the queues in the first place. Number 3, it'll be abused. The exact same thing has been said for many mechanics that have come to Dead by Daylight, such as the Survivor HUD to improve solo queue, or the visual heartbeat being added for those that are hard of hearing and deaf. Which, as far as we know, neither have drastically improved the escape rates of survivors. In fact, the worst case scenario for many solutions in regards to accessibility is that it makes the quality of life slightly better for players that don't struggle, which I think I'd prefer instead of having no accessibility for the players that do require it. Plenty of other games with a much bigger scale of players have great accessibility, such as Fortnite for example. With a peak of over 500 million unique players, Fortnite has colorblind options, controller support and customization options, visual audio options for NPCs, footsteps, gunfire, there are subtitle options, individual audio sliders, and just so much more. Number 4, it's a nerf to XYZ. Probably not. There are more than a couple of ways to make games accessible without nerfing your precious whatever. Whether or not it's correctly executed to the satisfaction of those that are concerned, I don't know, and we won't know until there's an attempt made for those that need the accessibility options. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, I've split the video into 4 parts and I've chaptered them. You can find those below. It'll be general gameplay, maps, killer specific, and then survivor specific. Along with them, I'll describe it more in depth and some potential solutions as well that I've created. But I am more than happy to take in feedback and hear some of your potential solutions. Let's start with overall game lighting. Filters have been a huge topic and surprisingly a very controversial one. I personally don't think filters give any advantage, not really, but the base game for Dead by Daylight is super dark and I would rather not strain my eyes personally, but I also crank the saturation just so it looks better in general. This is actually common for many games, but console players struggle especially since filters, in a sense, don't really exist aside from, I guess, TV settings, but this is something that everybody should be able to have, and then maybe that way people will stop complaining in general. Because for some reason, like I said, people seem to think that filters are cheats. Deepwound has a very similar effect where the screen can be unnecessarily dark, simulating tunnel vision, leading to eye strain. Both of these issues could be adjusted with better in-game settings, as low, medium, high, and ultra are extremely outdated. FOV issues with the Blighted Serum and Shadowborn. This is pretty self-explanatory, but playing killer from a locked FOV can cause motion sickness and migraines. And for some with pre-existing vision impairment issues, it also limits 3D depth perception. Similarly with Survivor, Blighted Serum is an add-on that gives a speed boost and changes the FOV once activated. But the problem with this is that another teammate can use this on you with no warning and you're stuck with it. FOV slider is already on the way for killer, which is awesome. However, for the Blighted Serum on the Survivor side, I'd recommend the FOV just not changing. Improve upon the colorblind feature. According to many players that suffer from colorblindness, the option available in DBD simply isn't in-depth enough and requires extra tweaks. These should be simple to fix and are quite self-explanatory. I'm not colorblind myself, so I think they would have to work closely with people that are. The color of scratch marks in the killer stain cannot be changed. They don't really improve with the colorblind settings, and they blend in quite easily on some maps. For example, the Shattered Square. I think it'd be amazing to customize the colors and make them stand out for all players, not just those with accessibility issues. Directional sounds from things like spirits phasing or boon totems are difficult for hard of hearing and or deaf players to discern. Implementing visual audio for players would be a nice quality of life change and accessibility change. And many games such as Fortnite have seen great success with it, like I mentioned previously. The uneven volume in-game can be startling or sensory overload at times. Leveling the blood web with lots of blood points or navigating the game's menu can actually be ridiculously loud at times. But implementing separate audio for the blood web, menu, maybe even screams, etc. would be pretty good. Maps are pretty self-explanatory for the issues. Visually, if the majority of these were fixed, I don't think there'd be many issues. Toba Landing is unique to this, of course, but additional map noises make it hard to discern what's going on in actual gameplay, whether I'm playing Killer or Survivor. But some other maps with issues are the Borgo color scheme, consistently being red. Even though they've changed it since release, it's still pretty hard on my eyes, and plenty of others. There are flickering lights that occur across multiple maps, such as Haddonfield, Leary's, and whatnot, that can cause sensory issues and migraines from the dimming. Red Forest and Coldwind also have a distinctive haze that makes it a little hard to see things that are going on in the background. Boon Totem audio is quiet and also directional, causing issues for many killers trying to snuff them. This ties in a little bit with the visual audio idea I suggested earlier, but also increasing the audio of boons as a whole to be more in line with other in-game noises would be nice. Blinds are too bright from flashlights, flashbang, and blast mine, leading to sensory issues for some, but especially those that are epileptic. Flashlight clicking was changed to alleviate this, but since then, nothing else has been added to help further. The blinding noises could have stayed the same to indicate that you've been blinded, but the blinding screen itself could be darker, or the blind screen just doesn't appear at all, but the beam of the light could instead, such as when a survivor misses a flashlight save. Certain killers are too loud at times, causing disorientation and sensory issues for some. A couple of easy examples are Plague's whisperings during the Corrupt Purge, or Billy's Saw Rev in Sprint. Lowering these incrementally until general player satisfaction would be extremely beneficial, or better yet, just give us a volume slider. Spirit's directional phasing audio being difficult for hard of hearing and or deaf players, as I mentioned previously, applies here. Visual audio would be awesome. Plague's vomit for those eating or the condition emetophobia can make it uncomfortable or impossible to play matches, but disabling the vomit noises and visual effects can fix that. This doesn't provide an advantage for survivors, but it also doesn't nerf the Plague either. Killer power overlays, such as Pyramid Head's Torment, are similar to Deep Wound and can create a little bit of a tunnel vision effect, so I think lessening some of these or removing them from staying around the screen could be helpful. And you could tell whether or not a survivor is still affected by the killer's power just by looking at the HUD. Knockout can trigger sensory issues due to the underwater effect, but the effect could be lessened or moved to alleviate it, while keeping the same effects such as crawling and recovering slower, but also having the blindness effect. Vertigo on certain killer animations, such as the nurse blink fatigue, can be disorienting, but again, this could be easily solved by reducing the intensity of the sway. Clown smoke is extremely disorienting and can make many nauseous, but removing the effect while keeping the hidden penalty would work just as well. Chorophobia, yellow glyphs, merciless storm, etc. can be pretty difficult for players with limited mobility, but having an option to decrease the difficulty without providing an advantage could be in place instead. Dredge's nightfall, consisting of tunnel vision due to darkness, constant moans and screams, and whining, can be extremely triggering for those with sensory issues, PTSD, and other mental illnesses. It doesn't normally affect me that greatly, but I can definitely see where many are coming from because the intensity can be overwhelming at times. Visually, they could reduce the tunnel vision effect by scrapping what we have now and just having a slightly darker screen with the blindness effect. Auditorily, making the sound effects very light and removing the passive sound effects entirely could help too, but I do think the sound effects from Dredge's M1s could stay. Doctor static and skill checks are horrible for those with sensory issues and epilepsy, and despite the previous rework being in place, it still isn't enough. The consistent static noises and occasional blasts can cause migraines and make it impossible to play against. Reducing the visual effects and keeping the gameplay mechanics would be much better. Hack's traps turning the camera for the player can cause overwhelming disorientation and is a rather outdated mechanic. As if someone instantly teleports, there's not much of a reaction time for those disoriented by it. That is actually all I have for the video so far. I do think accessibility in DBD is a very important topic to talk about. And again, I would like to use my platform not only as a content creator, but especially as a fog whisperer to voice these kinds of issues. And as I mentioned earlier, I am very accepting of feedback, but I do ask that you guys stay respectful. And if you can't be respectful, I'll just delete your comments. You guys need to remember that just because you don't struggle with something doesn't mean other people don't. But I think it's very important in conversations like these to have empathy. And if you don't understand, that is perfectly fine, but instead of being harsh about things, maybe ask questions to figure out more so that you can understand from a better perspective. But again, that's all I have for the video. You can probably find me live with the link up at the top left, and I'll see you guys around. Thanks for watching.